Okay. Actually, I think we can go ahead and do the next one together because it's more or less a review. We'll kind of go through it. I think it goes through it later, but it seems out of place right now, so we'll go ahead and do it. And then we'll finish up the chapter. So this one's just dealing with factory overhead rates. So again, we're applying factory overhead in this chapter. Same as we did before. We have a predetermined overhead rate, usually based on direct labor, but now we have to apply it to more than one work in process. You know, in our example, we had mixing and packaging. So factory overhead is going to be applied separately to each of those work in processes. So this one's just kind of a review from last chapter, really. So we're going to go over it. The cost accountant for Kenner Beverage Company estimated that total factory overhead costs for the blending department for the coming fiscal year would be $3 million, and total direct labor costs would be $2,400,000. And then they give us actual labor of $198,400 for the month of May, and then factory overhead $253,200. So part A just says, what is the predetermined factory overhead rate based on direct labor cost? Well, here we're just taking, again, you always, to calculate a factory overhead rate, you take your estimated total overhead, which they gave us at $3 million, and divide it by whatever your cost driver is. Direct labor, $2.4 million. So what's my overhead rate as a percentage? Well, do it.
125.
125, very good. So I took 3 million divided by 2.4 million, and we're going to apply overhead as 125% of direct labor, okay? Or we're going to take direct labor times 1.25 to make it simple, but they wanted it as a percentage. So overhead's applied as 125% of direct labor, okay? That's for the whole year. We use the whole year's estimates. Now it's asking us to journalize the entry to apply factory overhead to production for May. Well, what do I debit and credit for applied overhead? What accounts? And this is the same as the last chapter. Work in process, good. And factory overhead, very good. So in this case, notice the only difference is we have a specific department. Work in process blending department, debit. Credit to factory overhead blending department. Okay. Okay, so applied overhead is always credited. How would I calculate my overhead for May? Well, what was my direct labor for May? Let's see. Yeah, we had the 198,400, right? We had direct labor in May of 198,400. So how much overhead would I apply in May? How much? You don't add in this case because we're applying overhead.
Are you multiplying?
Yeah, that's all you're doing. You're taking your 198,400 times 125%. Okay. So 248,000. 248,000. Okay, so just your labor, your actual labor for the month times the predetermined factory overhead rate, that gives us the factory overhead for the blending department. Okay. Well, then it asks for the balance. Well, to me, it makes sense then to actually look at what we did to factory overhead, right? So remember with factory overhead, on the left or debit side, we put any actual, and on the right is our applied. Well, we had that, right? We credited factory overhead 248,000. And then they give us our actual factory overhead costs incurred 253,200. Okay, so our actual is 253,200, and our applied was 248,000. Did we over or under apply? Under, very good. We applied less, right? How much less? 5,200. So that's under applied. I don't know if it's the board or my marker. It's always that fun game. Which is it? Ah, it was the marker. Okay. So the balance was 5,200, the difference. And is that a debit or a credit balance? I kind of wrote it right. It's a debit balance, right? I have it on there. And then we already answered that it was under applied. Okay. So again, that's kind of really a review from last chapter on how to deal with over or under applied overhead. So our actual was greater, so it's under applied. Okay. Any questions on that one? Do what? Well, we still have to apply overhead for each work in process department. That's part of our costs, right? Like we have to have that overhead for our conversion costs. So they're just showing you it's the same. You're applying overhead the same way. The only difference is we have to apply overhead to each work in process account, like blending and then assembly or whatnot. Yeah. Any questions on that one?